click subscribe and hit that bell notification. All right, so we started covering the rebellion of Sheba last week so that we can cover some ground, and so we're going to go back and rediscuss that. But first, let's turn to Proverbs 18:2. 18, we're going to read verse 2 and 6. It says, "A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his own opinion." Verse 6, "A fool's lips walk into a fight, and his mouth invites a beating." What do you guys think about verse 2? What is that talking about? No listening, lots of talking. What about verse 6? Not thinking before he speaks. A fool will open his mouth and receive the consequences. Verse 2 says, he likes to talk, doesn't like to listen. Verse 6 says, he will invite a beating from what he says. When he speaks, he will get beat up. There are consequences for what he says. So let's look at some fools as we move through this chapter. So 2 Samuel chapter 20, verse 1. "There happened to be there a worthless man whose name was Sheba, the son of Bichri, a Benjaminite, and he blew the trumpet and he said, 'We have no portion in David, and we have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tents, O Israel.' So all the men of Israel withdrew from David and followed Sheba, the son of Bichri, but the men of Judah followed their king steadfastly from the Jordan to Jerusalem." So Sheba, as we covered last time, is a rebellious scoundrel. He's worthless. He fancies himself a leader. And so what does he do? He speaks up. Instead of listening and bringing understanding, he wanted to give his own opinion. And as we read in the Proverbs, when a fool speaks, they will receive a beating. So Sheba is inviting a civil war. He thinks he can stand up against the king who has just returned home, and all the men of Israel follow him, but that's only going to live for a time, because we know that divisive people use people's emotions, use momentary transitions to take people captive, but that doesn't hold for long on most people. Verse 4, we have Amasa. "Then the king said to Amasa, 'Call the men of Judah together to me within 3 days, and be here yourself.' So Amasa went to summon Judah, but he delayed beyond the set time that he had been appointed. And so David said to Abishai, 'Now Sheba the son of Bichri will do us more harm than Absalom. Take your Lord's servants and pursue him, lest he get himself to fortified cities and escape from us.'" So verse 4, Amasa, anybody remember who he is? He's the new commander, exactly. Now, why was he promoted? Joab killed Absalom. Potentially, doesn't tell us clearly, but we can infer that David was pretty upset and demoted Joab and placed Amasa in his stead. So where did Amasa come from? He was the rebel commander. He was the commander of Absalom's army. So he shows himself to be strong, to be a leader, to be capable. And so David looks at him and he says, "Hey, you go to Judah and round up the clan. We're going to war. You have 3 days." Now, what happened to Amasa? Verse 5, "Amasa went to summon Judah, but he delayed beyond the set time that he had been appointed." What does that mean? He's late. It's your first task. This is the first job, man. Like, I just gave you the job. 3 days later, you can't get the guys riled up. Are you not a leader? Are you not capable? So he failed. He failed to do his job. So David in verse 6 says to Abishai, "Now Sheba, the son of Bichri, will do us more harm than Absalom. Take your Lord's servants and pursue him, lest he get himself to a fortified city and escape." And there went out after him Joab's men, and the Cherethites and the Pelethites and all the mighty men. They went out from Jerusalem. So David looks to Abishai, who is Joab's brother. We're going to learn a little bit later that he is the commander of the 30 strongest soldiers in David's army. He's the guy after Joab. And it says that all of Joab's men went with him out to battle. So who's really in charge? Joab. He's definitely behind the scenes pulling the strings. David commanded Abishai, but we're going to find out here in a second that Joab is right there with him, because those are Joab's men. Is David king over those men, or is Joab king over those men? Is Biden the president, or is Obama the president? So David gives his orders, but we find out in verse 8, when they are at the great stone, that is in Gibeon, Amasa came to meet them. Now Joab was wearing a soldier's garment, and over it was a belt with a sword in its sheath fastened on his thigh. And as he went forward, it fell out. So what is that talking about? It's a bait. So this is an interesting scene. David sent Amasa to what? Get an army. Amasa shows up with an army. Half, full, we don't know. He shows up with a bunch of men. And who does he meet? Joab and Abishai and their army. Now, are they working together? Are they a team? They should be. They're on the same side. They're both serving David. And Amasa is technically the commander, so Joab needs to submit to him, right? Now it says that Joab is clothed very particularly, like he would going out to battle. Got his garbs and whatnot on, and he's got a sword, right? He's got a sword around his hips on a belt. And as he's walking, what happens to his sword? It falls off. Like, that's crazy. So now you have potential jealousy, potential envy, potential vengeance. And here comes Joab to meet Amasa, his enemy. And his sword falls on the ground. What does that tell Amasa? He's unarmed. He's unarmed. This is a safe situation. His weapon's right there. I know he's not going to do something. Verse 9, and Joab said to Amasa, is it well with you, my brother? And Joab took Amasa by the beard with his right hand to kiss him. But Amasa did not observe the sword that was in Joab's hand. So Joab struck him with it in the stomach and spilled his entrails to the ground without striking a second blow, and he died. Joab calls him his brother. Is he actually his brother? So David's mom has sisters, and these are all kids of David's mom. So they're all cousins and nephews and all this different stuff. And so Joab goes walking up, drops the sword, reaches up, grabs his beard and goes to kiss him on the cheek. This is very typical Middle Eastern greeting at this time. This is what the Bible calls a holy kiss. You greet one another with a holy kiss when you hear it in the New Testament. Joab is concealing a dagger in his left hand. So everybody knows he's right-handed. He dropped his sword on the ground, but he's concealing a knife in his left hand. He goes up, he grabs a beard, goes to give him a kiss, and he stabs him. He stabs him once and shreds his abdomen, opens him up wide, and his entrails fall out, and he just falls on the ground. And it says here, he didn't hit him a second time. And it says that he died. We're going to read that he didn't die quickly. We're going to read that this dude laid on the ground suffering while everybody walks by. Why is it important that it says that Joab didn't hit him a second time? Because he would have died too fast. He wanted him to be there as an example. This is what happens when you come against Joab. Was there any hint that Joab might do something like this? Kind of. He killed Absalom when he wasn't supposed to. Ishbosheth's commander, Abner. Abner was making a peace treaty with David that the house of Saul and David could live in peace. He was going to deliver the kingdom to David. And there was going to be peace. And Joab didn't like it. And he went and he says, hey, I just want to talk to you over here by the gate. So he pulled him aside and he stabbed him. It's exactly what he just did. This is Joab's MO. This is what he does. And he is proving a point here. I want you to suffer. I want everybody to see what happened to you here this day so that they will learn a lesson and they will see. And I want David to find out about this because he needs to learn his lesson too. Joab is a gnarly dude. The past couple of chapters, as we've been learning about David's fall, like his just downward progression towards destruction, we've been watching Joab's increase in his standing, that he actually stands out as the person of wisdom, the person of knowledge, the person of godliness. And there was this weird shift between Joab and David. David came down and Joab kind of went up. But here's the thing. Joab isn't a good person. Joab is a bad guy who happens to do good things periodically. He happens to have wisdom periodically. But his intentions are evil, murderous, and torturous. And that's his true character being played out here. Because this is what we see over and over with Joab. When David gives the kingdom to his son Solomon, you know what he tells Solomon about Joab and Abishai? Take him out. David says, I couldn't do it. You need to do it. I need you to punish them for their sin, for what they've done. Then Joab and Abishai, his brother, pursued Sheba to the son of Bichri. He left him there on the ground. 11. And one of Joab's young men took his stand by Amasa and said, whoever favors Joab, whoever is for David, let him follow Joab. Who's the real commander? Joab. Now, this scene, you have all of the guys who came from Judah that were following Amasa. David said, Amasa's the commander, obey him. He is leading the charge. He is my voice. To disobey Amasa is to disobey David. That's where Judah's coming from. And then you have Joab's men. And then in front of everybody is this scene where Joab kills Amasa. And you're just looking like, what do you do? As a soldier, what do you do? And here comes this soldier, one of Joab's men, and he stands up and he shouts, pick a side. If you are for David, you are for Joab. So what is he doing? He's bringing the two groups together, forgetting Amasa. He was in charge for like 3 days. Like, we've been at war with Joab for decades. Like, he really is our commander. Like, if you're for David, you're with Joab. Let's go. All the guys are like, okay, well, whatever. Here we go. And they just go to deal business. Verse 12, and Amasa lay wallowing in his blood in the highway. And anyone who came by, seeing him, stopped. And when the man saw that all the people stopped, he carried Amasa out of the way into the field and threw a garment over him. When he was taken out of the highway, all the people went on after Joab to pursue Sheba, the son of Bichri. So everybody just was standing there looking at them. Like, think about these soldiers. Nobody tried to give him help. I mean, I guess if you're a soldier, you know when too far is too far. There's just no coming back from that, right? But they wouldn't kill him. They wouldn't put him out of his misery. They wouldn't help him. They just stopped. It makes you wonder how bad this scene really was, what this wound really looked like for soldiers to be stopped in their track because of a guy dying on the ground. Think about it. These guys have gone to war multiple times. They've seen battles. They know what it looks like for guys to be screaming, asking for help, like get their hands cut off, their legs cut off, their throats cut. The true depth of sorrow and pain and suffering that these men have seen, and they're marching out and they stop. They can't ignore it. They've seen it 100 times, but this is something different. And so everybody stops in their tracks. Joab and Abishai are taking off and they're leaving, and the whole army just stops to look at this guy. So eventually somebody grabs him and drags him off into the field and is like, well, they don't bury him. They don't mourn for him. They don't care. He's trash. They literally just took him out and threw a towel over him. It's a pretty sad scene what happens to Amasa. Verse 14, and Sheba passed through all the tribes of Israel to Abel of Beth-maacah, and all the Bichrites assembled and followed him in. I put Beth-maacah, but it's actually Abel. So the city of Abel. It says that Sheba passed through all the tribes of Israel, came to a certain town, and all of Sheba's family members, all the Bichrites, that's the tribe that he's from, so maybe a couple hundred guys, or who knows how big these dudes are, they all kind of just take over this town. Now, it's going to be important to recognize that there is a large group of people with Sheba, because what's about to happen has some inference behind the scenes that unfold in this city. This city is taken over, the gates are shut and fortified so that the army coming against them can't get in. And so now you have a legitimate war. You have the city versus Joab and David's men. Verse 15, and all the men who were with Joab came to besiege him in Abel of Beth-maacah, and they cast up a mound against the city, and it stood against the rampart, and they were battering the wall to throw it down. Then a wise woman called from the city, listen, tell Joab, come here that I may speak to you. And he came near her, and the woman said, are you Joab? And he answered, I am. Then she said to him, listen to the words of your servant. And he answered, I'm listening. Then she said, they used to say in former times, let them but ask counsel at Abel. And so they settled the matter. I am one of those who are peaceable and faithful in Israel. Listen to that. I am peaceable and faithful in Israel. You seek to destroy a city that is a mother in Israel. Why will you swallow up the heritage of the Lord? Joab answered, far be it from me, far be it, that I should swallow up or destroy. That is not true. But a man of the hill country of Ephraim, called Sheba, the son of Bichri, has lifted up his hand against King David. Give up him alone, and I will withdraw from the city. And the woman said to Joab, behold, his head shall be thrown down to you over the wall. Then the woman went out to all the people in her wisdom, and they cut off the head of Sheba, the son of Bichri, and threw it out to Joab. So he blew the trumpet, and they dispersed from the city, every man to his home. And Joab returned to Jerusalem to the king. So Abel is known as a city of what? A city of wisdom. And it's full of people who want to just live a quiet, peaceful life in faithfulness. Who are they faithful to? They're faithful to the Lord. They're faithful to the king. They're not rebellious. Why are you attacking me? That's the question. Why are you going to destroy a faithful, peaceful city that is the Lord's heritage, right? We are an example of the wisdom of the people of Israel. Why are you going to destroy all of us? That's the implication. When they take over that city, anybody who's involved with this rebellion is going down. And what is Joab's response? I need one person. I need the root. I need the heart of the rebellion. I need Sheba, the son of Bichri. What is her response? Let me talk to the people and we'll give you his head. So the women went to all the people in her wisdom, and then the head came flying over the wall. Remember the scene how Sheba shows up? Is he alone? No. Would it be easy for the people to attack him? No. There's a struggle from within. There's an undocumented perspective of this story. The clan that Sheba comes from, that he is leading as a rebellious clan against the king, takes over this town, or at least goes in and shuts the door. They have enough influence to tell them to not open the door when Joab shows up. He could easily, from the king's command, open the door. We're here on commission of the king. He has the authority to do that. And any peaceful, righteous people would be like, okay, open the door. No problem. So they withstood them long enough for them to dig up all the dirt and build a siege mound to climb up over the wall. And here comes this woman, and she's, I need to talk to you. Let's have a conversation. I'll settle this. So what was it that she said? She turned around, went back to the city, and had a conversation. What do you think that conversation was? We got to kill him or we all die. It is better for one man to die than for everybody to die, right? That's the general argument. One man to deliver the city. So here's the thing. He had the tribe of Judah at this point. Judah is going to get numbered in a couple of chapters. Judah is going to number to 500,000 soldiers. The other 10 tribes are going to be numbered 800,000 soldiers. One tribe is over half of the entire other group of people. So for Amasa, he only had to get, he didn't have to get a ton of people. He just had to put out the call to Judah, and he would have gotten a lot of people. I think that this fight is bigger than we can perceive. David is not playing games. You remember what happened last time he played some games? The force had to do his bidding. God had to step in. David's like, I'm not playing that game. Sheba is going to cause more problems than Absalom. He looked at the problem of Absalom and thought it was a small deal. Sheba was going to be a big deal. I don't think he was holding back his soldiers. So I think, yes, the 12,000 from the previous fight with Absalom plus Judah, which could be any number. So yeah, she's talking about the wrath and the fury that the king can bring upon these people. And she is saying, we don't want to be a part of this. We need to send out his head. And I think she even convinced the other dudes. They're like, yeah, well, we got ourselves into a problem here. So this woman in her wisdom convinces them, they throw the head out and they disperse. That is a very short-lived rebellion of Sheba. It is not nearly as good as Absalom's. And I think it's because it wasn't planned well. Absalom was actually quite brilliant. He was very smart, but the Lord didn't like him. And now you have a fool, a real fool, a genuine fool. And I like how it starts with Sheba blowing the horn, and it ends with Joab blowing the horn with Sheba's head in his hand. The declaration of war with the horn, and then the declaration of peace with the horn. Jesus will return on the sound of the trumpet of the angels. That will bring war and peace at the same time. Peace for us, war to the planet. He will dip his robe in blood. Scary business. Okay, verse 23 through 26, this is David's cabinet. Joab was in command of all the army of Israel, and Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was in command of the Cherethites and the Pelethites, and Adoram was in charge of the forced labor. And Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, was the recorder. And Sheva was secretary. Zadok and Abiathar were priests. And Ira, the Jairite, was also David's priest. So not too much to mention about this setup of people. I think we've been introduced to them quite a bit as we move through the text. It is interesting that Ira is David's personal priest. It used to be a different guy. So David's got like a new priest ministering to him particularly. And it's interesting because there's no real temple. There's the Ark of the Covenant. There's a meeting place where you can go and you offer your sacrifices on the altar. But why does David need a personal priest? It's just a curiosity for me. I don't think there's a real answer. Maybe the priest was more of the holder of knowledge, right? They would have the Torah. They would have the first 5 books of the Bible, or Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Numbers. They would be able to have a conversation with the king about what is in the text, right? David would be like, what does it say about the laws and the judicial things that God has spoken? And they would be the advisor to the king about God's stuff. So potentially that's why the priests are mentioned so much. And then it says that there was a guy who is in charge of the forced labor. What forced labor? The slaves. Israelites had slaves? So all the other countries had to pay taxes. Not all of them became slaves. The Ammonites were put to forced labor. And that was David's mercy. I could destroy you, or I could put you to forced labor. So the people had a choice in the Gibeonites. We're going to talk about Gibeon in chapter 21. The Gibeonites made a contract or a covenant with Joshua. And Joshua said, we won't destroy you, but you're going to be woodcutters, and you're going to be stone cutters, and you're going to be water carriers, forced labor. Like, you get to stay in the land because we made a mistake and we made a covenant with you, and God's going to hold us to that covenant, but you're going to serve us. We are going to keep you under our thumb. So there are people who are forced labor, and they follow under certain laws in Leviticus for proper treatment. You don't get to beat them. If you beat them and they lose their eye, they go free, stuff like that. You lose tooth for tooth. There's still justice for them. They're not typically treated particularly like Jews, but they would have certain laws and freedoms. Chapter 20 is the end of 2 Samuel. It's the end of David's political reign. We have reached the pinnacle of him as the king. And as we move forward in chapters 21 through 24, we start reading random stories. It's believed that the author of 2 Samuel didn't really know where to put these stories. They didn't really fit in the kind of the flow of the text. And so he kind of just compiles them at the end of the book. And we talk about the Gibeonites with Saul. Right? We go all the way back to what Saul did, and David has to live with it. We get David singing some songs of deliverance. And in chapter 23, we get David's last words. It says that these are the last words of King David. But then it goes on and it talks about David's mighty men, and then David taking a census of the people. So it really is a mashup of previous events that happened in the past during David's reign, but chapter 20 is the highlight and the end of David's era, of his political problems. This is the close of all of his struggles and all his difficulties. Like, he's not going to have any more rebellion. He's not going to have any more wars to fight. He has reached the pinnacle of the suffering for his sin as well as a king. And it's kind of the idea that he kind of just lives happily ever after. When you get into 1 Kings, in the first chapter, David dies. It just talks about him in his old age, having to confer power over to Solomon. It's really just a close on that chapter. And then 2 Samuel chapter 24 talks about the temple. The census is important because that's where it's going to be determined that the temple should be built there. And that's where we jump into Chronicles and Kings, where it's Solomon's job to build the temple. So that's the connective stories between all of this. So 21 through 23 is just a mashup. 24 prepares us for 1 Kings and 1 Chronicles, for Solomon's kind of movement of that era. What is your application? Don't let your mouth write checks that you can't cash. So there's a scene here that is reminiscent of Jesus. When the elders were talking about Jesus, they were talking about killing him. It's better that one man should die for the whole nation. And it says that the high priest spoke that at the time as the high priest, prophesying that Jesus would actually die for the sins of the nation, for the sins of Israel. And so you have one man that would die for all. You have one man that would die for the city of Abel. You would have one man that would die for the nation of Israel, and you would have one man that would die for the sins of the world. Jesus is shown here as the one who would suffer for sin. He is the representative of the one who receives the wrath so that others do not have to receive it. The king's fury, the king's anger, the king's retribution for the rebellion, is poured out on Sheba. Not that Sheba's the savior. Sheba's still definitely the bad guy, but he represents the Lamb of God that is sacrificed for the sins committed and the propitiation, the payment for peace. It was the price of Sheba's head that brought peace for that city. It was the price of Christ's blood that brings peace between us and God. We are reconciled by the blood of his son, and now we have peace. We've been saved from the wrath of God. Wisdom is at the forefront here. Wisdom of that woman. You have the foolishness of Sheba, you have the foolishness of Amasa, and you have the wisdom of that woman. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 24, it says, Jesus is the power of God, and he is the wisdom of God. And so having wisdom is to be desired above all things. That's what we learned in Proverbs. More than gold, more than silver, more than anything in this life, wisdom is to be adhered to. Now, what's interesting is that in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, Paul is making an argument because people want secret knowledge. People are being fed false doctrine. They're being sold a bill of lies. And so the Apostle Paul makes it very clear. The gospel is simple. It seems so foolish that God would give his son, that by believing in that sacrifice, you can be saved. It sounds silly and stupid, but Jesus is God's wisdom. And that is the peak of wisdom. That is the height of wisdom, is to recognize the true value of the gospel and adhere to it. To put your faith, your trust, and your hope, your expectations, everything you have in Christ. That is true wisdom. It is the power that saves you, and it is the knowledge of true wisdom. Jesus Christ, our wisdom. And that's Paul's argument. That's the peak, that's the pinnacle, that's the top. All of our concern is the truth of the gospel found in Jesus. He is our wisdom. And now you have discernment. What is discernment? How would you define discernment? Able to understand good from bad, being able to make your own decision, being able to see right from wrong, true from false. It is the perspective of sight. To have wisdom is to see clearly. It can be motives, it can be future consequences, or warning signs. So women tend to have a really good sense of discernment when it comes to people and their character. There's a reason, like a woman meets somebody and immediately just says, I don't like that person. Like, why don't you like that person? I don't know. There's something strange about them. There's discernment. And then there's being able to read people's motives. And having a conversation, you can be like, this person says all the good things, but their words aren't really expressing the full details. I can see past their words and see their true motives. Or warning signs like Abner, Joab, Absalom, warning signs. Amasa should have been able to see that Joab was a real threat, and he let his guard down. He couldn't discern the danger. And what's interesting is that David exalted this guy to the number 2 place in the land, and he lacked the foresight to perceive Joab as a threat. He probably wasn't fit for the job. He had some characteristic that made him stand out, but his greatest flaw, lack of discernment. He couldn't get people in line on time. He couldn't get the deadline met one way or another. He couldn't perceive consequences that the king would play out on him if he didn't meet that deadline. Because here's the thing, if you were threatened to meet a deadline with your life, would you meet that deadline? Absolutely. And 3 full days isn't that hard if you can organize people around you and execute the task. If you have 25 people at hand, you can say, everybody, scatter, go out, gather people, be back here by this time. He just needed to delegate, but somehow he's late. He showed up 4th day, apparently, and he was late. And then he couldn't perceive the night. He didn't see it. He was fooled by the sword. It was all a ploy by Joab. Amasa died for a lack of discernment. And it's sad because in the church, it's the very same thing. The warning signs are there. You can see the bodies on the road. If you look at the charismatic movement, you can see the chaos it causes. If you look at all these churches and their belief systems and what they teach, the prosperity gospel, the health, wealth, name it and claim it. Like, you look, you can see clearly that this stuff is not good, it's poisonous, and yet people just swallow it hand over fist. They don't have the discernment. They can't see the consequences. They don't see the motives. They only hear the words. And the sad thing is that it happens in our churches all the time. You got people who come in and they're rebellious and they sway people. Look what happened to Israel. David just came home. The people were offended because Judah was ushering him in, and all of Israel chose to rebel against King David. And they rebelled for a moment. But do you notice that they're not in the text anymore? It says that all the people followed Bichri, verse 2. All the men of Israel withdrew from David and followed Sheba. Verse 14, Sheba passed through, and all the Bichrites with him. Everybody decided that this is probably not the best idea, but they had already picked a side against the king. They had already made decisions that put them in a bad place because they lacked discernment. They couldn't see, like, oh, Sheba's actually not a good leader. Sheba's gonna get us into trouble. So having the capacity to see clearly in front of you. Next week, we will be talking 2 Samuel 21, things remembered. This is going to be an interesting chapter. It's going to be painful. It's going to be strange. It's going to be bloody. Dark days in David's life, in Saul's life, and it gets kind of weird. So come on back next week for that.